Third point of clarification, I don't see the question being debated here so much as one of God's existence, so tangentially that's going to come up. But really the primary one is about the foundation of goodness, and so far I think we've stuck to that pretty well. But there is a bit of confusion here because of the moral argument for the existence of God. William Lane Craig, who was mentioned previously by Matthew, I find it hard to believe he'd made the statement about killing heathen. I'd like to see where he said that. I don't always, I'll have to look at that. I don't always agree with everything he said, quite a few I don't. If he said that, it'd be certainly one I would be quite horrified by. But he resurrects something of the Kantian moral argument with the following syllogism. If there's no God, then there's no such thing as the good, or no such thing as moral values. There clearly is such thing as good in the world and objective moral values. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. I would agree with Lane's conclusion that God exists, but it's not the road I would have taken to arrive there. At best, this kind of proof can illustrate only that there is a logic and coherence of thought undergirding the theistic position. This kind of argument is incapable by nature, as Kant himself ironically demonstrated, of proving anything. There are also difficulties with the form this argument practically takes. Many theists would have problems with the order in which the statements are placed, and realize that much more work needs to be done in establishing what actually is the good and what basis we say it clearly exists, something Craig regrettably doesn't really go into. These are interesting questions, but not the ones we're here to debate, because we're not debating the moral argument for the existence of God, but rather the question, can there be good without God? Now, a couple questions I'd like to see answered or raised by the atheist in this debate. One I think has already been went to a bit. The other I'd like to hear something on. First of all, there is a very long tradition in Western philosophy and theology of closely linking the question of God's existence with the existence, for lack of a better term, objective moral good. I think personally we see it already in Aristotle's Ethics. Others might disagree, but certainly we see it in Augustine, we see it in many of the medieval philosophers, we see it fully developed, even overdeveloped in Immanuel Kant. The challenge, I think, lays largely then with the atheist position to unravel this link and to suggest an alternative foundation for objective moral goodness if they are to successfully answer the question in the affirmative, namely that there can be and is a foundation of moral good without God. Certainly there have been a number of naturalistic attempts to do just this. I think some better than the others, and I very much appreciated Leigh's comments. I think she went a long way in starting to lay out one such moral idea or foundation based largely on ethology studies, looking at different creatures and beings, how like or dislike are they to human beings. Some good ideas there, but I still have some difficulties. I wonder about the bats. Are the vampire bats really exercising altruism? Is this something akin to morality, or is it just simply a survival mechanism? Is the continuum between humans and other life forms amount to just a difference of kind? Or is it a difference of kind, or is it just a difference of degree? And at the end of the day, is this really the same as morality? Is this a foundation for morality? Do we look at human behavior and say, what benefits my own continued existence? And is this the best decision for me? Is it the best decision for my neighbor? The best for humanity in general? Who decides that? Where do we come up with the ideas that Leigh yourself mentioned, the study of 5 moral foundations or goodness? We don't claim that because as religion, these things exist. So I quite agree, before any religions develop or their full-blown form, we would have these kind of ideas of goodness, because we're not saying that. We're saying because God exists, human beings have this idea and can recognize there is such a thing as moral good. The other question I would ask, and this has puzzled me, so under some sort of critique or just out of curiosity, I'm curious why so many atheist thinkers should want to answer this question in the affirmative. After all, is there any more evidence for the idea of objective goodness and moral values than there is for the existence of God? Do you not end up with a faith commitment to a starting proposition about objective moral goodness that's simply one step removed from the commitment to the ontological foundation for moral goodness in God's very being that I, as a theist and a Christian, would make? I find it curious that more atheist thinkers have not opted for what seems the more logically coherent response and adapt something like the moral arrow theory of John Mackey and others, which rejects the idea of moral realism and says there really is no such thing as objective morality or objective goodness. Richard Garner, another atheist philosopher and moralist, is a proponent of this view. He rightly points out that the argument for objective moral goodness requires similar faith and acceptance, as does that in an all-powerful deity, and that it's self-destructive for the atheist to argue against God's existence on the one hand, on certain grounds, and then to accept essentially the same grounds and arguments for the existence of objective morality. He argues that it's better to bite the bullet and admit there is no objective morality and face up to the practical problems that this raises. And I'd just be curious to hear a response to that as well. Thank you, and I look forward to our continuing discussion.
Now we're going to have an opportunity for each side to ask a question to the other side. If that's what we've got. You want to start? I'll ask Ian if you want to start, or you have to come forward. Well, we'll keep moving anyway, so. Question.
We seem to have wandered away from the question. The original question was that whether there could be good without God, which I think that, given that several of the negative team did actually state that it was possible for atheists to be good as it was possible for Christians to be good, I still don't think that question has been answered. But this is a fantastic opportunity to ask a question that often bugs me. I'd like to know, since there's a wonderful, in the philosophy of science there's an idea of pessimistic induction, which I really love, which is when an anti-realist asks scientists, how do you know, given that everything has been wrong about your theories so far, they've proven to change, how do you know that you're right at the moment? And I'd like to pose a version of this question and ask, given that so many gods have passed through history, I personally see religion as very much a natural phenomena in the same way that I see a moral basis as a natural phenomena. What basis do you have for thinking that yours is the right one, that yours is the one that is providing this basis for all of the rest of us, many of whom, I gesture to the world here, many of whom don't share your beliefs?
Yeah, I could say something just briefly. Might not be what the others would say. Probably none. But there's always a qualification. That doesn't mean it's not right, and it's not a correct position. Working from the sciences, you could look at so many theories coming up within physics, quantum mechanics, biology. So many things have been adapted, proved wrong, started again. People could come up, as you suggest, and say, how can you believe that, no, your theory that the universe is either expanding, not expanding, contracting, whatever, flat, is the correct one, given that so many before with new data have proved to be wrong? And I'd simply point out that the fact that I look at what I see and make this judgment that others have been wrong, no matter how many of them have been wrong before, if it's not a statistical game, it doesn't mean that mine has any less chance of being right. So I don't believe, because you could come up with the numeral gods that society has ended up abandoning, walking away from, that doesn't mean that therefore the odds are mine isn't right either. If there is a God and a creator God, then I believe that God would reveal himself, that someone would understand this and do this. I can't prove that I've got the right one. I can demonstrate that there are logical reasons why I think I have the right one, and why that works for me and for many others, but I can't come out and prove it. But at the same time, I don't think that a whole line of other gods and religions that hasn't worked somehow make it any less viable or the problem any more perplexing than for the scientists to say, why not give up all theories right now, because the whole history of my particular field has been one theory after another having to be adapted or backtracked or completely redone.
Do you want to ask a question while you're on the feet, or keep the questions and answers short, so the audience can have a go?
Yes.
My question relates to the Euthyphro dilemma. As Mark quite demonstrated, Christian theism actually has an answer to the Euthyphro dilemma. But let's take, for instance, genetics and apply the Euthyphro dilemma to that as well. If we get in the good from genetics, if it comes from that, is it not arbitrary because it'd be something else? Or if genetics develops in accordance with the good, then doesn't that mean that the good is higher than the genes?
This calls back to what Mark asked before. If the vampire bats are behaving that way as a survival mechanism, is it really altruism? Yes, it's altruism, because altruism in humans is a survival mechanism. We all benefit from helping each other out when we need the help. So ethics as an emergent property of genetics is all about survival. And if the selective pressures on us change so that it becomes imperative that we all just go hard out for ourselves as quick as we can, that's what will happen. That will become the morality. That's why I think you cited our side as having posited objective morality. I don't think we have. I think both my previous speakers claimed that there is no objective morality. It is subjective. It is human morality. It works on Earth in our era.
Thank you. Another question from our answers, friends?
Yep, okay, I'll ask the question. I'm quite confused by the argument put forward, I think, by the first speaker and certainly by the last speaker, which seems to be this. God exists, or God is, therefore there is objective moral law. Now it seems to me that that is not a valid argument. At best, there's a whole lot of intermediary propositions that you need to put in there to make a logical leap from God exists to therefore there is objective moral law, and I didn't hear any of these intermediate steps put in. And it rests on the premise that you do have is extremely questionable, and is becoming more and more questionable as humans evolve. But, you know, basically what I'd like someone to do, the question is, what are the steps between God exists and there is, as a premise, and the conclusion, there is objective moral law? We've had nothing to link those two statements in a logical way.
During my statement, I referred to St. Anselm's, well, not by calling it St. Anselm's, conception of God, that God is a maximally great being, and that within that you can define certain traits that a maximally great being would have, because if goodness is a trait, then it would logically follow, if God was a maximally great being, that trait would be part of of the conception of God. And so then from that, you can then find objective moral values emanating from that trait. So it's not a missing premise. I'm not quite sure what you mean by invalid, in that it's whether or not you're arguing with the logical structure of the argument, whether or not you're arguing whether or not it's sound or not. But the argument from an argument from St. Anselm would give you a reasonable answer to that.
Okay, can I just ask a supplementary question? St. Anselm's argument has been dismissed by philosophers for a long time, because what he's